I'm Larry Weeks, and this is Bounce. On this podcast, I have conversations with people from a wide variety of fields. I talk with academics, athletes, entrepreneurs, doctors, journalists, and many others to try to get their stories or research on how to deal with or prepare for life's challenges, setbacks, aches and pains, and ups and downs. To that end, it's an interview format, long form, and despite the fact that I'm scratching my own itch and even through my frequently dumb questions, the guests are game, they're very insightful and always encouraging. I'm learning a lot. I think you will too. This is life. Welcome to Bounce.
There is a somewhat linear relationship between, effort and success. Well, what does that mean? That means, hey, if you work 12 hours a day, you're going to do better than if you work 11. And if you work 16 hours a day, you're going to do better than if you work 12. When you see some of the extremely successful, there are some times where there is that Faustian bargain. And I don't think that's the trade-off that a lot of people want. I think a mistake that's commonly made is if you just kind of check these boxes and do these things and you get good grades and eat your Wheaties, you'll be successful.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bounce Podcast. On the podcast today, my guest is Eric Barker. Eric is the creator of the blog Barking Up the Wrong Tree. He has almost 300,000 subscribers, and he is the author of the recent Wall Street Journal bestseller of the same name, subtitled The Surprising Science Behind Why Everything You Know About Success is Mostly Wrong. And it is also the topic of our chat today. Eric's work has been mentioned in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Atlantic Monthly, Time Magazine, Business Insider. He is a former Hollywood screenwriter, having worked on projects for Walt Disney Pictures, 20th Century Fox, and Revolution Studios. Eric was part of the Wii team at Nintendo, worked on the BioShock franchise for Irrational Games, and helped Spider-Man creator Stan Lee turn the Backstreet Boys into superheroes. Eric is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, holds an MBA from Boston College, and a Master of Fine Arts from UCLA. Eric has fenced in Russia with the Olympians, grappled with MMA champions, trained in Krav Maga with members of the Israeli military. He's told me he's never killed anyone that really didn't deserve it. Eric's a great guy. I want to start the podcast by citing something that Eric has in his book regarding Benjamin Bloom's research on successful people, where he found that talent usually doesn't control what you can achieve in life. Eric quotes Bloom as saying, "After 40 years of intensive research on school learning in the United States as well as abroad, my major conclusion is what any person in the world can learn, almost all persons can learn, if provided with the appropriate prior and current conditions of learning." So that is our context here. We have that chance to learn what Eric has learned. So today we talk about what he found to be the most surprising thing when studying what successful people did, what we get mostly wrong, and we'll talk about some of the myths regarding high achievement. We talk about the value of intensifiers, what they are, and how they hold the key to your biggest weakness possibly being your greatest strength. You'll also find out the secret that enabled Navy SEAL recruits to make it through BUDS training. And I'll give you a hint, it's not physical prowess. Great conversation, a lot of interesting stuff. You're going to enjoy it. So let's talk to Eric. Eric Barker, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
You got to pronounce the blog. So I'm going to try it. Let me try it. Bacadesio.
The URL. The blog's name is Barking Up the Wrong Tree, the same as the book. But yeah, the URL was a little odd, but I picked it a long time ago. Probably not my best marketing decision.
Well, you can't even say it, can you?
No, it's Japanese. It's Bakadesyo. I can say it.
Oh, you can say it. All right. Yeah, I was like, what the heck? And then I read the story behind it. But you've got, is it 300 subscribers, 300,000 subscribers, 208? How many?
Almost, yeah, like 296 or something, 297.
And you also write for Time, is that right?
My stuff is syndicated on Time.
Syndicated on Time, got it. Okay. Well, congratulations on the book. I told you before we started, I really liked it a lot, and it's marked up all over the place. My Kindle edition highlighted all over the place. and I took a bunch of notes. Some of the stuff, because I'm a big reader, I was like, I'd read Seligman's work and some others, but I love the way you kind of vetted all the information. How did you come to write about this topic?
I mean, it's just, I've had a very unconventional career myself. So a lot of the maxims of success that we all heard growing up, like nice guys finish last, and it's not what you know, it's who you know. Those didn't seem to apply in a lot of scenarios I found myself in. And I just realized they'd never been thoroughly vetted. And on, my blog, I'm always talking about, strategies to increase happiness, productivity, relationships, and that are vetted by science. So it seemed kind of like an interesting target to me to look at these maxims of success that everybody unquestioningly repeats, and really ask, like, are they even true? Like, is this even real? And to kind of give them the Mythbusters treatment. And to me, that seemed like a really exciting idea. And like I said, personally, I found that I didn't, a lot of these things didn't seem to apply to my life. So I wanted the answers as to whether these were true as well.
What's the Eric Barker story? Tell me about your life, man. How'd you come to be a writer? And
I basically, I grew up in the Philadelphia area. And after college, I was a screenwriter in Hollywood for about 10 years. Wrote for Disney and Fox and some other places. And cool. Then I worked in the video game industry, and for a couple different companies in the video game industry. And while I got a Master of Fine Arts from UCLA, and I got an MBA, and after the MBA, it was funny. I was unemployed because it was after the 2008 financial crisis. And so I started this blog, and that was when I went into the video game industry, and I just kept doing the blog as a side project, and it just kind of kept growing and growing. And eventually I quit my job and just focused on the blog. And then after a few years of that, people were saying you should write a book. And so I gave that a shot. And I always say the toughest thing about writing a book was learning how to write a book because I'd written screenplays, I'd written blog posts, but every medium is different. And if you don't, I've been, in my experience, if you don't respect the medium and actually learn how it works, you're going to be in for some trouble. So I had to kind of learn how to write a book, and that was arduous but rewarding process. But it was a lot of fun.
Was it a proposal first and then you wrote it, or did you write the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote a proposal. It went out, and we had a good amount of interest, and everything went well in terms of the sending it out there process. And then it probably, from concept to release, probably took about 3 years, from like the initial idea before I'd even written the proposal. And then the actual writing of the book probably took a little less than 2 years.
So that's actually typing out your thoughts and notes and.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Like, cause the first six months or so was all proposal. Though some of that ended up in the book, but then like actually writing the book, took probably about 2 years all told.
Including rewrites or whatever.
Yeah. Like,
okay.
I mean, you got, and proofreading and all that stuff.
So full time, or you were still writing the blog and doing the book and everything?
I mean, the only other thing I was doing was the blog, and okay. I post one long form post per week. So it's certainly not, a 40-hour week job, but there is still a pretty good amount of work involved. So
I want to get into the book, but so any tips on writing that you learned, like, from either productivity standpoint or just writing? What was your writing process? I think probably the best advice that most people need on writing is what some refer to as the discipline of the chair, which is sit down and do it. If you actually start and don't stop, you're ahead of 99% of people. So the book looks at science behind what separates the extremely successful from the rest of us. We learn what we can do to be more like them. And find out in some cases why it's good that we aren't. So to that point, so do you think, given the choice, let's say the tech folk out there, you don't think given the choice they would want to be a Steve Jobs? Or if it's an amateur baseball player, they wouldn't want to be like Ted Williams? Is it a Faustian bargain?
It can be. And, that's something I get into. I mean, I mentioned it with one anecdote in the introduction, and then I cover it more thoroughly in the 6th chapter where, basically there seems to be, some of the research shows, that very often there is a near linear, relationship between effort and success, or at least if you have the basic tools, if you can check all the boxes, then there is a somewhat linear relationship between effort and success. Well, what does that mean? That means, hey, if you work 12 hours a day, you're going to do better than if you work 11. And if you work 16 hours a day, you're going to do better than if you work 12. Well, what does that mean? That means that the most successful basically crowd out everything else. And if you want to be number one, then that almost requires that. And so you see a consistent pattern where very often people are obsessive, and I don't mean that in a mild way. I mean in a very serious way. They just sacrifice almost everything else, including relationships, sometimes including happiness. Yes, there are such thing as unhappy billionaires. Or you have people like the story I tell in the introduction of Yuri Robich, who, succeeded at the Race Across America, which is, Outside Magazine declared the most grueling ultra endurance event. But the guy did it because he was basically, unhinged. I mean, he was basically he basically lost his mind when he would ride, but that gave him an advantage because it's such a grueling event that being able to disassociate from pain, was a benefit. Being able, even if you're hallucinating.
Yeah.
So that's the question where, like you said, a Faustian bargain, where if I told you, hey, you'd be able to be a billionaire. All you have to do is rub the genie's lamp. You could be a billionaire, but you're going to be mentally unhinged, or you're not going to have you're going to have miserable, awful relationships, or you're just going to be unhappy. Now, again, that is not every scenario, but when you see some of the extremely successful, there are some times where there is that Faustian bargain, and I don't think that's the trade-off that a lot of people want. And so that's why in the book I do talk about a personal definition of success, not this relentless quest for more, which often ends up leading to those scenarios of extreme success in one area of life, but it comes at the expense of the other area.
Yeah, I thought that was very good in your book, where, that's the key, defining what success is for you. And some people might indeed would take up a bargain because they want those other things at the expense of, personal relationships or happiness. Did you read Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs?
Yes. Yeah, I did.
Do you think, because I kept reading through it and I was like, oh my God, what a dick, right? But I mean, he made all these. Do you think he could have accomplished what he did without being such an ass? It's not. Is it a prerequisite? Like, I understand the time spent, but
obviously there are certain situations where you read it and you're like, you didn't need to be a jerk here. Like there are certain scenarios like that. But one of the things I talk about in the book, which Harvard Business School professor Gautam Mukunda talks about, is intensifiers. Basically, a more nuanced view on beneficial personality traits, where we like hardworking, smart, nice. Those are kind of objectively good traits. And that's a very easy way to kind of look at the world. However, what Gautam was talking about is traits like, for instance, I could say stubbornness. Now, stubbornness is generally considered negative. Can hurt your relationships. It can cause you to stick with things that aren't working out, or beliefs that are outdated or outmoded. However, in the right context, stubbornness is persistence. Stubbornness is grit. If you are an entrepreneur, very likely without stubbornness, you won't do very well, because many entrepreneurial ventures do not have a high statistical likelihood of success. So in one context, stubbornness is horrible. In another context, it's totally essential. So it's not this mere negative. It depends on the context. And like I said with Yuri Robich, losing your mind, generally a negative. But in this unique circumstance, a positive. And I think you see things like that where, with the Steve Jobs scenario, Jobs could be very manipulative. Okay, we think manipulative is negative, but were those Apple products? Would they have come to light otherwise? And was that a good thing? It's hard to say. So you have qualities, and I get into this in the first chapter of the book, where some of your weaknesses can be strengths if they're in the right context, because, like I said, you have some qualities that are universal positives, some that are universal negatives, but there are a lot of other ones that are environment dependent.
So, and a lot of the book is the findings in the book are counterintuitive, to your point. Give us what you found was the most surprising.
What I found that was extremely surprising was the issue of there were a number of things that were very surprising. I mean, in general, but also that like intuitively may have, the things that were counterintuitive, where they seemed initially like, huh? But then once you got the explanation, it started to make a lot more sense. So, for instance, the issue of networking in terms of success and career is just, almost overwhelming, where, networking, having a big network, knowing a lot of people makes a huge, huge difference. And when I go down the rabbit hole in terms of exploring the research in terms of extroversion and introversion, it's just this overwhelming amount of evidence in terms of the benefits, in many cases, of extroversion from networking in terms of your career, but also one of the most established principles in personality research is higher subjective well-being in extroverts. And in English, that means extroverts are happier. There's even research that shows when introverts act like extroverts, they pretend to be extroverts, they're happier. And I'm a pretty introvert guy myself, and this, I'm committed to trying to tell the truth, or at least this was not very encouraging for me and, in terms of both success and happiness. And but then, so it just immediately leads you to the question, well, then is introversion just a negative? Is it just a bad thing? And no, that wasn't the case. What you see is that without all of that social time, some of which can be used for great things, beneficial, things like networking, but some of it's just wasted. Introverts are far more likely to be experts in their field. If you look across the board, introverts get higher grades. Introverts are more likely to get PhDs. They're more likely to get Phi Beta Kappa keys. They're in anywhere from chess masters to musicians to athletes. Across the board, introverts are more highly skilled. In fact, there's one study that basically said that extroversion was inversely correlated to individual proficiency. And again, in English, the more extroverted you are, the worse you are at your job. Because not in every case, but in a significant in a study, on average, what you saw was extroverts are spending more time with their friends. They're spending more time socializing. Yeah. It makes them happier. But that's less time in the batting cage. That's less time honing your skills. So it was really interesting to see that, once again, it's not that there's a positive or a negative. There's benefits to both sides. There's downsides to both sides. That it is more nuanced than the sort of black and white maxims like nice guys finish last or it's always this way. Mm-hmm. No, it's a lot more dependent upon context.
What is it about the topic of success that you think we, for the most part, get wrong?
I think a mistake that's commonly made is just this issue that there are a few boxes that if you just check them, that in the abstract can lead to extreme, to big success. If you just kind of check these boxes and do these things, and you get good grades and eat your Wheaties, then you'll be successful. And what I saw in terms of not only the heights of success, like a lot of money or prestige, but also fulfillment and happiness in your career, it has a lot more to do with really understanding your signature strengths, the things you're uniquely good at, and finding an environment that rewards those. It's much more about a personal understanding of yourself and aligning your environment with that than it is just, if I just get good grades, then I'll be rich and everything will work out. Or if I just make that connection, if somebody just notices my work, then No, it's a lot more about a personal understanding and then finding an environment that's aligned with that. And I don't think most of us really think about that or spend the time to try and make that happen.
To try to get you now to give me some boxes to tick off.
Yeah.
No, to that point, would you say what you said about signature strengths, or what you just talked about, would you say that is a macro recommendation that you have where other success catalysts fall under? And if not, are there attributes or kind of macro attributes where it's a domino effect? Yeah, if I do this, then most of either a success factor or happiness or doing well falls under, or is that too simplistic?
I think there can be a sort of domino effect, but it's not an immediate linear sort of, if you just do this, then everything will fall into place. There's a lot of murky experimentation that needs to go on there. Mm-hmm. Where one of the things I talk about is Peter Sims wrote an excellent book called Little Bets, where he talks about basically taking part of your time, energy, money, resources, and devoting it to little experiments, trying new things, like low cost attempts, basically, looking at things like a venture capital firm in terms of opportunities. So, like a VC firm might, take investments in 10 companies, and their expectation is not, and all 10 of these are going to work out and make us $1 zillion. No, they know that up front. They know that up front, 7 of those are going to collapse. 2 of those are going to break even, and one is hopefully going to be the next Google or Facebook. And kind of looking at opportunities, in our own lives like that, where, taking a yoga class, learning to code, getting out there and meeting some new people, and realizing that, hey, a lot of the things you try, aren't going to work. Some of them are going to be nice, but some of them are going to produce your next job or your next hobby or your next close friend. Mm-hmm. And we hear a lot about grit these days, like just this, massive devotion to long-term goals, which is extremely important. And a lot of people have struggled with that. So grit's important, but we also need to look at, the issue of quit, where, again, the Little Bets model of trying lots of things, knowing that you'll quit most of them, but through that sifting, you'll find new opportunities and new possibilities. And the world's changing really fast. You have to be out there trying new things, because stasis isn't really an option. Things are moving too fast. Most people are, having certainly multiple roles, but most likely multiple careers in multiple industries over the course of their life. Just sitting there expecting that, 10 or 20 years from now, your life and the world is going to be the same as it was, it's not very realistic anymore. And that means there a level of experimentation that is going to keep you advancing in the same way that the world is.
I like that. And I haven't read that book, Little Bets. I want to read that. I talked to Ryan Babineau, who wrote Fail Fast, fail
Yeah.
often. And that was his concept of experimenting. He was saying that you just try a lot of different things and take the sting of the failure out of it by looking at it as you're just experimenting, and you need to do a lot of that. It's paradoxical in the way, right? Go do this stuff. And if it doesn't necessarily pan out, you can learn from it, and you just keep going by looking at it as experimenting. You talk about the value of pretending. Is that so? Visualizing works or no?
Visualization, can work for. There's good research in terms of visualization with skill work. So, visualizing the perfect golf swing or shooting hoops in basketball. Where what's problematic is kind of wishing, where people dreamily think about what they want and
name it and claim it. Yeah.
Yeah, or kind of like believing in like The Secret, where if I just wish hard enough, the universe is going to bring me what I want. That is actually problematic because the research shows that our brains are not great at distinguishing reality from fiction. That's why movies are exciting. And when we wish for something vaguely and generally, it doesn't motivate us. It actually saps motivation because our brain feels like we already have it. The research had a great little acronym called WHOOP, where it's wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. And when people go through that 4-step WHOOP exercise, they're actually in a much better situation to try and achieve their goals, which is first they wish, but they don't merely stay at the wishing stage. They visualize a very particular outcome. Then they think about the obstacles that are preventing them from getting their outcome. And that's the critical thing, is thinking about what's getting in the way. Are those surmountable? How am I going to overcome that? And then fourth is planning, which is actually saying, here's what I'm going to do about it. And when people go through that WHOOP exercise, not only do they end up with a plan, but as Gabriel, I believe her name is Ettingen, her research showed that it also acts as an emotional litmus test, where if people go through the WHOOP exercise and they feel energized, then there's actually a higher likelihood that that's going to be a good plan, that they're going to be in good shape. Whereas if people go through the WHOOP exercise and they feel less confident, less motivated, then that plan might actually be less effective and something that they should reframe or reconsider.
Oh, that's very interesting. Are there periods in our lives when it's good to be delusional? I think you talk about that in the book.
There's no doubt that you look in terms of the issue of optimism, where pessimists. The research generally shows that pessimists are more realistic. That they don't have these illusions. However, if you are utterly realistic, people would never try extreme things. People would never try to beat the odds in entrepreneurial ventures or anything difficult. So what you see is that optimism, promotes grit. It promotes persistence. If you believe, and it makes intuitive sense. If you believe that things are going to work out, if you believe you have an edge, you persist. And if you believe that, this is not going to work out, well, then things seem futile and you're more likely to quit. So optimism, even if somewhat delusional, can promote persistence. And pessimism can cause you to quit. Now, again, whether that's a positive or a negative, it's more nuanced, because we all know people who are too unrealistically optimistic, who are almost disconnected from reality, and they persist in things to no good end. So we need to quit things. If you kept doing everything you were doing from when you were 5 years old to 10 years old to 20 years old, you don't have time in the day. You have to quit some things to be able to apply grit to other things. That's the much more realistic, nuanced perspective than merely shouting, never give up. Well, we have to give up things. And in fact, giving up things provides more energy, time, and resources for the things that we shouldn't give up. So it's less an issue of never give up and more an issue of selection and saying, what's really important to me, what's likely to get to me where I want to go, and what things are not paying off where I should reallocate those resources.
I was reading the book and I felt set up, like through every chapter, like you would start with the benefits of self-confidence, and make, so I'm reading, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I've got this. This is a trait I think there's some areas I feel real self-confident. And then you're like, no, hold on. Here's the problem with self-confidence. So you're, which is great because there's two sides to every coin, and I get that. And then you would go into the benefits of, lower self-confidence and learning from your mistakes and being open to other ideas. And it's, everything's in moderation, I guess. But on the point of lower self-confidence, because you talk about humility, and I totally understand how humility can open you up and you can learn and so on and so forth. But is there a difference? There must be a difference between low self-confidence and humility, right? Somebody, is not very confident, may be afraid to do things, which somebody could be very confident yet humble.
That's why in the end, I say that the confidence paradigm is actually problematic. Okay. Is because when you get to either extreme, it really breaks down, where the extremes of confidence is narcissism and hubris, and the extremes of low self-esteem is, just not believing in yourself and not pursuing anything. Those are both problematic, but somewhere in between, and the problem I think we have is that there's, a tremendous bias in terms of confidence, where you just don't see any books on how to lower your self-confidence. The other side is not getting, we call it humility, but we're giving it another word, and for confidence, we give narcissism and hubris another word. But we all know that when people get more and more and more confident, they stop listening to other people. They start to think that they have all the answers. And once you think you have all the answers, you stop looking for answers. Mm-hmm. And by the same token, we all know that if you're in a learning environment, if you have a mentor or a teacher, that going in there thinking you know everything is the worst thing you can do. Whereas having deferring to someone and saying, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. That's actually a pretty healthy attitude when you're being educated towards learning something or towards a goal. So the confidence paradigm, as opposed to the paradigm of self-compassion, where we're much more realistic about our goals, and rather than trying to build ourselves up to unrealistic proportions, we're much more focused on being realistic and forgiving ourselves, realizing we're human, and forgiving ourselves when we screw up. That perspective not only has roots in Buddhism that go back, over 1,000 years, but also recent research by Kristen Neff at the University of Texas at Austin shows that it actually works, that it can have all the benefits of self-confidence without any of the negatives. Because the problem with confidence is that very often it's delusional or contingent. Delusional because confidence, we all know people who are too confident, who don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And by the same token, confidence is contingent, where very often we feel like, every day we need to wake up and slay a dragon to maintain our self-esteem. And if we don't, and eventually we will fail at something, our self-esteem crashes, and that puts us on this emotional roller coaster where we feel like we have to prove ourselves, we're running on a treadmill. If I want to feel good about myself, I have to do X, Y, and Z. And that's not only it's like an unpleasant situation to constantly feel like you have to prove yourself, but also eventually it's, you're going to screw up. So looking at things from a self-compassionate attitude, where you take a much more realistic perspective and you forgive yourself. You see that this, really helps in a lot of scenarios. Procrastinators who forgive themselves are much more likely to actually get going. Yet I think most of us are tempted to beat ourselves up, because again, we get this we build ourselves up and then it comes crashing down. And that delusional or contingent attitude of confidence can really be problematic, versus taking a much humbler approach of self-compassion. You just see it's a very different paradigm.
It's very interesting to read in your book where someone says, if you want to know which CEOs will run the company into the ground, count how many times they use the word I. To your point of being overly confident, I guess, right?
No, you see, things like that consistently, where, very often, narcissists are more likely to ascend to leadership positions, but that doesn't mean that they actually do a better job.
Yeah.
We see in a lot of scenarios, including the Navy, research shows that, leaders who are more supportive, who are less selfish, actually do better and perform better. And, but those people who are extremely, confidence, there's no doubt, the research consistently shows that it makes us feel good, and that it has an enormous effect on how others perceive us. Confidence that's why everybody wants it. It feels good and it makes you look good. However, confidence is very dangerous because in many situations, it turns into delusion. We think we're better than we are. There was some research that what Dan Ariely did, where study subjects were given a test. Some were allowed they were given a way to cheat that they thought they wouldn't be caught. The researchers knew about this. And so obviously the cheaters did better because they cheated. Then when they surveyed everybody afterwards, they asked, how do you think you would do on a future test that was similar to this? And the cheaters felt that they would do better. So they had actually succeeded by cheating, yet they felt to some degree that they had succeeded by skill. Like as if, it's as if you got into a self-driving car and the car drove. And then somehow you thought next time you would actually be a better driver. It was a delusional sort of thing that when we try to fool others, sometimes we fool ourselves. And you can see that would be a very dangerous perspective, that that you would succeed by cheating, but think that somehow that would actually improve your skill level in future encounters. So it boosted their confidence, but not their skill level. So it's a problematic scenario, and we have to really be careful of that, especially with something that gets such universal praise as confidence.
What is your view of school in general and college specifically?
I mean, in general, it's necessary. It's important. And the research shows that, on average, college graduates do better. However, what you see is that school doesn't reward all of the characteristics that can lead to success in life. When you look at valedictorians, some of the research by Karen Arnold at Boston College shows that while valedictorians do well, they don't reach the very heights of success. And that is because what school rewards is really compliance with rules. And so students that are passionate about a particular subject, students that are not as conscientious, that are more likely to break rules, that are more creative, school does not reward that. Yet life does reward that. Life is messy. School has very clear rules, and if you follow them, you will get A's and you will do well. Life is much messier, and there are a lot of different possibilities. You can succeed by networking. You could succeed by creativity. You could be terrible in life. You can be the equivalent of F's in English, F's in history, F's, in all these different subjects. But if you get an A++ in computer science, well, I don't think that Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Oracle are going to care that you don't understand history or English, very well. Life tends to reward specialists, whereas school rewards generalists. So while, on average, education is certainly beneficial and helps people, it's not this perfect thing that maps that maps exactly to success in life, and certainly not to extreme success. Because when you look at, they did a study of the Forbes 400, some of the richest people, the 400 richest people on the planet, and what you saw was the subset of the Forbes 400 that dropped out of college actually had, I believe, somewhere like three or four times the net worth of the average of the full sample. So the dropouts did better on average, and in fact, the dropouts did better than the subset that went to Ivy League universities.
So what is the value of college then? Do you think if you know you're going to be a doctor, then do it? Otherwise, don't. I mean, would it have to be a specialization that you think would garner the most advantage for going? Or what do you think?
I think that it's important to make the distinction between safety and more extreme success, because doing things that are safe, you can defend against downside risk, and you can try to increase upside, and those are often at odds with one another. The more things you do to reduce downside risk, you're probably going to reduce the potential upside as well. And for most people, that's great, because most people don't want to say, okay, I'm going to flip a coin, and heads, I'm going to be a billionaire, tails, I'm going to die immediately. That has high upside and extremely high low side. So the more you do to reduce downside risk, also, you're probably going to reduce the chance of extreme success as well. So, but we like to think that you can kind of have both. And like I said, you go to college or get a master's degree, get an MD, get a JD, you can do very well. However, some of the things you will do to be safe or to reduce downside risk are also going to reduce potential upside. We sort of conflate those two and say that, if you play by the rules and play it safe, then you're going to have extreme success. And that's, life's not that, school is that clear cut. Life is not that clear cut. If you're a valedictorian, you need to get straight A's, and straight A's means that you have to be a generalist. You have to, at some point, you have to stop. If you're passionate about math, you have to stop studying math to get an A in English and get an A in history. And so that means that if you are someone who wants to, be an amazing programmer, or be an amazing mathematician, or statistician, or whatever else, you're actually going to have to spend less time on that. So the person who is going to be the best mathematician or the best background in math is probably somebody who's going to say, I'm going to spend more time on math, and I'm going to get a B in history. I'm going to get a B in English. And so you will actually be a specialist. You'll be better at what you do. You'll probably be more rewarded, in the job market. But you're not going to get the grades that we think are all important.
You mentioned this earlier. You talked about intensifiers. Could you explain that for me? Because you say that pretty much holds kind of the key to your using your weaknesses as a strength. And I'm probably butchering it or getting it wrong. Could you explain it for me?
It's just the idea that some qualities which we consider to be negatives in general can be positives in the right situation. Like the example I used earlier of stubbornness, which in certain scenarios, could really screw up your relationships to be stubborn and not open-minded. On the flip side, stubbornness can also be persistence in the face of opposition, which could be critical to being an entrepreneur or having a creative career. So there are a lot of, and like I said, the Yuri Robich example, where he actually would lose his mind, but that allowed him to disassociate from pain and to give far more. There was actually research showing that athletes who were a little less in touch with reality were able to push their bodies beyond the naturally conservative limits that they have. I don't think anybody would say that, hey, it'd be a really good idea to have mental problems. Or it'd be a really good idea to be so extremely stubborn. Yet, in certain situations, those intensifiers can actually provide benefits. So there are many times where many of us have quote unquote negative qualities, but they're only negative because of the environment we're in. We're in a situation where those qualities are not rewarded. We're being stubborn, but we're doing it with a boss in a very clear-cut 9-to-5 job, as opposed to being stubborn with an entrepreneurial startup idea, which is ahead of its time, and everybody needs to catch up and realize that's the future. So everybody's going to be telling you no, but you need to be stubborn or persistent enough to realize that they're wrong and you're right. So those intensifiers, those situations, we need to realize that many of these qualities are not universal negatives, that if we can put ourselves in situations where those are rewarded or those are beneficial, then your negatives can actually be positives.
Are there personality or profile assessments that we can take to identify such mismatches and or identify what the intensifiers are in our lives?
There hasn't been that much work. There's plenty of work in terms of signature strengths, and people can go to the University of Pennsylvania website and actually take a test that I believe was done by Martin Seligman and his group, and they can learn what their signature strengths are in terms of which qualities they're uniquely good at. And people who use their signature strengths more often not only are more successful, but they're also happier. They feel more respected. The more time you do what you're good at, the better you feel and the better you do. Intensifiers, the research in terms of that, there aren't tests you can take. But like I said, to sit down and look at the flip side. Look at what the spin is. Somebody who's extremely analytical analytical at the extreme, might have very difficult problems with personal relationships and the murkiness of feelings and stuff. Yet they might be fantastic at programming or fantastic at constructing great legal arguments. So just sitting there and saying, what is the flip side of this, rather than looking at the negative spin on characteristics like stubbornness or being extremely analytical. Somebody who is ruled by their feelings might have a lot of trouble in a lot of very organized, very rote sort of situations that call for logic and rationality. However, those people might be fantastic in terms of empathy, getting along with others, perhaps like sales, nursing, customer service, being really understanding emotions, feeling other people's emotions can be extremely powerful in any sort of work that demands interpersonal interactions. So again, looking at the problems we've had in terms of personality traits, there's often a flip side where those are rewarded. But if you're not thinking about them, if you're not identifying them in yourself, and then looking at the context and environment to see if those are rewarded, then they could stay negatives as opposed to being transformed into positives.
Yeah, not to oversimplify, but somebody could be, let's say in a sales job, and their stomach is tied up in knots with the idea of picking up the phone or talking to someone, trying to persuade them to buy something, and failing at it. And to your point, correct me if I'm wrong, but it may just be a mismatch where you may be an introvert, or that may not fall in as a strength of who you are, a personality strength. But yet, as you were saying, they may be more analytical, like to spend time problem solving, coding, doing something else, and it's just a simple career change, job change, and you could blossom, grow, if it's the right fit.
Absolutely. If you're an extreme, I'm
not saying all programmers are introverts. I'm just saying, there's something
probably more often than not.
Yeah,
my guess is that especially those that, because if you're an extreme extrovert, anything from programming to writing a book to developing a skill, getting those quote unquote 10,000 hours, the K. Anders Ericsson research was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell. Getting those 10,000 hours can be very difficult. If you want to be a chess master, if you want to, be a concert violinist, or anything else, like I said, computer programming, you're going to have to spend a lot of hours by yourself, working hard on something. Mm-hmm. And on the flip side, if you want to be in sales, if you want to be in, a mediator, negotiator, some, forms of being an attorney, you may have to deal with people an extreme amount. And so that's going to be extremely taxing on an introvert. So a really critical element is that alignment but if you don't know who you are and what your strengths are, and you don't know what the environment is actually going to require of you, then you can't align the two for success and happiness.
I think it's very important for us to stress that there are people that may be failing right now and beating themselves up, and it may be nothing more than a fit problem where it's not, to your point, it's not aligned with their strengths, but they haven't taken a look at that, right? And on the flip side, there's probably a lot of success out there to be had by this person if they make that change and discover that about themselves and make a move. Success being relative, whatever, doing well in something, right? So, reflect, look back, again, to your point, failure means more than just one thing, right? It could be saying a lot of different things that you need to be open to. I thought you were going to pillory all positive thinking, right? When I was reading the book, I'm like, oh, okay, he's chopping this up. But then you talk about Navy SEALs, and they need to be badasses. But one of the keys was really optimism, right? You use the term "the little engine that could." So back to, and I think you were mentioning Seligman's research on learned optimism.
Yeah, and optimism, promotes persistence. Optimism promotes grit. But there's that distinction, like I said earlier, between mere delusional, wishful thinking, where eventually it's going to come back to haunt you. But no, being optimistic and positive self-talk is something that the Navy helped get SEAL candidates through BUDS, which is basic underwater demolition, the training program, the real extreme vetting program that they have to go through. And optimism can really be critical, but once again, optimism taken too far can be delusional. It's a very powerful perspective, but we need to keep the reins on it in terms of not letting that go too far, or not thinking that optimism can promote persistence, but merely wishing, I think good things are going to happen. Well, that doesn't make the good things happen. However, if you're in the midst of hard work, you're in the midst of really trying, then optimism can give you the energy to keep moving forward. But if you're sitting on the couch staring at the ceiling, wishing and wanting, no, the universe is not going to drop $1 million or happiness in your lap.
But to the point, the navies were having a hard time. The guys were dropping out of the BUDS program, right? Yeah. They weren't getting through, and they had to figure out something. And again, this is all in your book. People should read it. But and they realized that there was some benefit, and I guess they've since implemented some kind of optimism training or resilience training. What?
Yeah, they went through 4 things that helped people get through BUDS, because the issue was after 9/11, the Navy needed to produce more special operations professionals like SEALs. But if you drop the standards, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So how could you help more people legitimately get through? What mistakes were people consistently making that with some training or education they could overcome, so that you would have a greater number of qualified SEALs and professionals? And they found that positive self-talk, an optimistic perspective, was really valuable and really helpful. towards helping people persist. And the distinction I was making was again, persistence means you're working towards something, that you're active in it, whereas merely wishing and hoping on the couch, that to being gritty and persistent in couch sitting is not going to get you what you want. You have to be hard at work. You have to be in a program or in a situation where you're working hard, and increased persistence will increase the likelihood of success.
Are there any personal practices that you've applied to your life based on writing the book, what you've learned over the years in your blog and what have you?
Oh, many, many, many. And one specifically was I was working so hard on the book that the chapter on work-life balance, there was a tremendous irony in that I was pushing myself very hard and seeing the dangers, reading about all the dangers of pushing oneself, too hard. And sacrificing relationships or happiness or whatever in terms of these goals. I have a rather obsessive personality by nature, and keeping that in check. The people who the research in terms of work-life balance, some of which was done by Nash and Stevenson at Harvard, showed that people who achieved something approximating work-life balance had 4 metrics. There wasn't just a metric of I want to make a lot of money. There were the metrics of, happiness, achievement, significance, and legacy. And basically what that means is, are you enjoying what you're doing? Achievement is, are you getting ahead, achieving your goals? Third is significance. Is what you're doing providing a positive benefit to the ones you love? And then legacy was, are you in some way or another making the world a better place and giving back? And it was people who kept some sort of, who were making deposits in each one of those buckets. Those were the people who felt they had a well-rounded life. Merely saying, hey, I'm making tons of money, that doesn't necessarily help your relationships. It can be a negative in terms of your relationships, in terms of your personal happiness. Or merely thinking about moment-to-moment happiness and not long-term goals, achievement. That's not a prescription for success either. So we need multiple metrics in order to make sure that we're not neglecting any area of life that is in the long term gonna help us achieve fulfillment.
All right, so I'm going to do a real quick Q&A here. So I'm just going to ask you if you do any of these things. If you answer yes, I'm going to assume that you probably have vetted it or researched it, and that's why you've applied it, or it fits your personality or something like that. And if I'm wrong, you can certainly comment. But real quickly, I'm going to ask you some real quick questions. Do you set goals?
Definitely.
Do you journal?
Occasionally, in specific circumstances, I use journaling to help me deal with emotional situations.
All right. Do you do cold plunges, ice baths, anything like that?
No.
Do you do any kind of breathing exercise?
Exercise, yes. And if meditation counts, then yes.
So I was going to ask you, do you meditate? So then you do meditate?
Yes.
Okay. Do you use it a mantra? Are you screaming? What are you doing?
I'm doing Vipassana meditation, so okay. Mindfulness meditation.
Have you ever had a bounce moment? So something at the time was difficult or challenging, something along those lines, but it turned into a defining event that maybe led to something better, whether a better situation, a better you, what have you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very often difficult situations, like that. I mean, where when I was focusing on the blog, I was focusing really hard on the blog, but I wasn't focusing on monetizing it. I didn't have big banner advertising. I wasn't selling products, and the blog kept growing, but, I really wasn't thinking about, financial, how was I going to continue to support this? And that made me start to think about what is something I could do where I wouldn't feel like I was, really, selling out or compromising my work. And that was one of the things that contributed to me writing the book, where, I felt like I was providing information in a different format, and, it could help support the work I was doing. And it would be a way that was consistent with my values and with the work I was trying to do.
I mean, I'm assuming you would hear from a lot of people that you've benefited, that have benefited from your blog and what you've written, right? That's
it's very rewarding.
Yeah.
A lot of people write to me and tell me that the blog and now the book have been very helpful to them, and that's really critical for me. I want to be. I'm putting this stuff out there, and I could just read all these things and make personal notes for myself, but I'm taking the time to try and to write them up, because I'm learning this stuff. I think it's beneficial, and so I'd like to share it.
Yeah, you should do like Amazon reviews. You should have like all of the self-help techniques out there, list them all, have kind of a star rating. Just tell everybody before you try something, go here, read about it, see what's working, and then let people. People could also comment. Anyway, so there's I think it's toward the end of the book, if I remember correctly. But man, there is a great story about Martin Pistorius. Could you tell that real quickly?
Yeah, Martin Pistorius. When he was young, he was struck by a mysterious illness. They believe it may have been a form of meningitis. They're not sure, but basically he ended up in a situation where he was locked in. In other words, he for all intents and purposes, it seemed like he was in a vegetative state. He really couldn't move. He was obviously still alive, but they believed he was brain dead. And the truth is he wasn't. He was completely cognizant. He knew what was going on in the world, but he was unable to speak or communicate. And obviously this is, terrifying and really hard. And he existed in this state for years, and was, like I said, believed to be brain dead. Was in an institution where he was taken care of, but he was abused by the staff. It was a frighteningly terrible experience. But what happened in the end was he did regain some use of his body. He was tested, and they realized that he was in there, and his mind was functional, and he was cognizant. And with some help, with the support, once they realized he was in there, he was able to get computer assistance to be able to speak. He was able to move in a wheelchair. And he went from being in this horrible locked-in state to eventually, once he was able to speak, once he was able to wheelchair, he was incredibly ambitious. And he went to college. He started a company. He wrote a book. He got married. And to think about the extreme that he went from being in this locked-in state to becoming successful, writing a book, getting married, having a well-rounded life. To think about how far he had to go in order to, and what he had to overcome to achieve, what many people would call a successful life, is so much more than what we have to do. It's an inspiring story, and we should realize that others have to go far further and work far harder than we do to get where they want to go. So that a good level of success is achievable by all of us.
Yeah, it was the way you had written the story, and I encourage everybody to get the book. And it was the perspective it gives you, right? To your point, boy, he had to start from being locked inside his body, not being able to move. And there are times like that when you read stories about what people are going through, but occasionally it gives you that new perspective on things like, whoa. I got a little headache, but I told her, whatever, get on with it. It's just...
Yeah, you have no idea. It at the risk of sounding like, a grandpa say, you don't know how easy you kids have it.
Yeah.
I mean, but there's a truth to that, where a lot of people suffer a lot more to achieve a lot less, and we can get very we can take things for granted and forget in many situations, and that's where the research on gratitude, shows just how critical that is for happiness, as opposed to taking things for granted.
Yeah, I talked with Kyle Maynard, who's a congenital amputee. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, without prosthesis. I was like,
That's amazing.
Larry, get out of bed, okay?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Geez, go to the gym. What are you doing with your life, right? I mean, he did, and he bear crawled all the way up. So it's like, what, come on, Larry, write the page you need to write. So one of the things, I don't know if this was Martin or you quoted him, but I had just written it down. I think he said, and maybe you wrote this, where he said, success is strange in that it cultivates more success. Once I had achieved something, it encouraged me to try even harder. It expanded my perception of what was possible. If I could do this, then what else could I do? And I just thought that was great. And I want to kind of wrap it up on that note. It was a really, really good book. Encourage you to everyone to go get it. And there's some important stuff. There's a lot more in the book than what I just talked with Eric about. So you guys go get it. Eric, this has been great. Thank you so much, man.
Well, thank you for having me on, Larry. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
So it's just people find you just on your blog, right?
Yeah, if people, the book and the blog are both called Barking Up the Wrong Tree. Yes, as you mentioned, my URL is a little difficult to decipher. So if people just Google Barking Up the Wrong Tree blog, or if they Google my name, Eric Barker, or they go on Amazon, Barking Up the Wrong Tree or Barker, they can find the book. And the best way to keep up with what I'm doing is to join my email newsletter. Almost 300,000 people subscribe to it now, and that will keep people up on the latest of what I'm up to on my blog.
And you're on on Twitter.
On Twitter, on Facebook, all of those.
All right, yeah, just Google him. He comes up all over the place. Eric, again, this has been great. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for taking the time, Larry. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's Larry. Just a few notes before we